In this video, I want to talk about a certain Clash of the Titans that is right up there with Mayweather, McGregor, or Godzilla and King Kong. No, but no, we're talking about heroin versus fentanyl, specifically cold turkey heroin withdrawal versus cold turkey fentanyl withdrawal. How are they alike and how are they different? So I've personally been blessed with the wonderful experience, opportunity to experience both of these life-affirming events, and I have lived through it and am now prepared to discuss both of them. There's a lot of stuff out there that compares like the effects of heroin versus fentanyl, but not as much about specifically the withdrawal. And from a first person perspective, what exactly is the difference between these two? Because they're both going to be terrible experiences, but how is one worse than the other, or vice versa? So one of the first things that kind of growing up in the opiate world, but not really having ever experienced fentanyl until it took over. You always hear about fentanyl. One of its main points of mention is that it has such a short half life, and the fact that it has a short half life um, uh, often gets correlated with it having a short withdrawal as well. Um, but immediately there's counterintuitive stuff going on because, case in point, people having to wait longer to administer Suboxone, buprenorphine after fentanyl, because I guess it's stored in fat, kind of like weed is. So is everything short because the half life short? Um, but yeah, you hear that fentanyl withdrawal is going to be brutal and quick, meaning quick over in 48 to 72 hours. Is that really true? So we're going to compare these two in terms of physical symptoms, in terms of mental symptoms, and then also in terms of post-acute withdrawal. And again, I'm only one person. Drugs affect everybody differently, but I will speak at least from what I've come to know as the main differences, as well as the similarities. Physical. Okay, so the physical similarities would be that um, this is going to be a little all over the place, but uh, the coldness, the chills, um, and the accompanying hot sweats, the back and forthness of it, and the smell of your sweat while you're in withdrawal. This is one of the things that doesn't get mentioned that much, but every time I find myself back in that unfortunate situation, I hate it almost as much as anything. Is the way that your sweat smells when you're going through a cold turkey opiate detox. That characteristic scent is there with heroin, and it's also there with fentanyl. Um, the sneezing is also there. The onset is roughly the same, though the fentanyl onset's a lot earlier, but the onset and kind of just the onset that's kind of driven by anticipated fear, and then that fear becomes actualized in little things like the chills or like the runny nose, the yawning. The yawning's there for both. Um, so that's all the same. The inability to fall asleep, or when you do fall asleep, you're asleep for 5 minutes, then you wake up, and it's that horrible feeling of waking up in withdrawal. That's all there. Um, so what's different? Okay, so historically, going through heroin withdrawal, I never personally experienced like the bad throwing up or the bad diarrhea. Like that was something that other people got. I was fortunate; I never got that with heroin. I got the body electricity and that like ants under your skin feeling really bad with heroin, which wasn't so bad at all with fentanyl. Um, but my God, fentanyl withdrawal, like I was throwing up and had the diarrhea real bad, especially the throwing up, the dry heaving. It would happen like every time I would roll over in bed, it would trigger me to dry heave. So like I'd have to like sleep, or I don't mean sleep, I mean just lay there and contemplate all the horrific things about my life in one position. Because if I were to change that position, it would just be a waiting time before the bile would start to get coughed up. And so that meant that not only was there the appetite suppression issue, but if I tried to drink or I tried to eat or I tried to eat a little bit in order to feel better, it would just soon come right back up. So that battle with dehydration and whatnot was significant with the fentanyl detox, whereas it never was that significant with heroin. But yeah, the heroin, like the chills and the body electricity, that feeling of panic and stuff, I thought was worse with heroin. Um, okay, so psychological. I've described the psychological aspect of heroin withdrawal as, if not worse than the physical part. I've thought of it like being in a cold, dark forest in the middle of nowhere, and you kind of like see a little campfire as the only source of light, half a mile away or something, and you're staring at that campfire as like the only hope of anything. That campfire symbolizes the hope, and you're terrified that it's going to fade away and you'll be left there forever in that cold darkness until you eventually die. Like, that's the kind of place that my mind goes to in heroin withdrawal. Um, uh, uh, along with all of the reflection and playback torment of everything that you've done wrong recently or in the past. I didn't find that stuff nearly as bad with fentanyl withdrawal. Fentanyl withdrawal, yeah, there's depression and stuff, yeah, because you're in your predicament and whatnot, but it's not as deep and heartbreaking. And I don't even know how to describe the mental aspect of heroin withdrawal in words. Just hell on earth, mentally as well as physically, but mentally much the same. Um, Fentanyl withdrawal felt like a largely a physical battle, and it's just like if you compare the highs of fentanyl to heroin, heroin just feels more, I don't know, like organic, wholesome, like nature's healing or whatever, and nature's painkiller. I mean, I know it's not opium, but you know what I mean. Um, versus fentanyl, which does feel cold and clinical, which is what people often will say. So I think maybe the fact that you're kind of like the cold and clinical is like kind of feels like a clinical medical way of describing the high. So like it's like the high and the low are all clinical and medicinal. Whereas with heroin, it just feels like you're swinging not in a medicinal spectrum as much as like a spectrum that feels like anything and everything meaningful in reality. So post acute withdrawal. Uh, so the lingering symptoms for both would be the sneezing. It's especially awkward in a COVID era to be sneezing all the time in public and whatnot, and being like, "It's not COVID. It's not COVID. I don't want to really tell you what it is, but it's not COVID." Yeah, the sneezing is there for both, and the coldness that lasts for a couple weeks is there for both. Um, I found I always had really, really, really bad insomnia for a couple weeks, if not a month after stopping heroin. And that is almost completely absent with fentanyl. Like the couple times I've come off of fentanyl, I've been able to sleep, very quickly, full nights and whatnot. So that is a difference. Can't really think of anything in terms of cravings. I mean, I think the cravings for heroin are, I mean, you're going to crave both of them, but I feel like cravings for fentanyl are almost cravings for heroin in disguise because you don't really crave fentanyl, you crave the ritual, and the ritual of both drugs are very similar. Um, both the ritual of actually taking it and the ritual of chasing it, obtaining it, and whatnot. So, like the fentanyl replacing heroin still satisfies the ritual and the thrill of the chase to an extent. So, you're going to have cravings quitting both, but I feel like, again, the craving for fentanyl is really just, craving for something that is probably gone unless you, whatever. So yeah, to recap, I would say yeah that one other thing I should mention regarding the duration. So fentanyl shorter half life. That's kind of how I started talking. Didn't wrap it up. Um, uh, Fentanyl is still going strong 3 or 4 days later. Um, uh, it's not like the worst is over in 3 or 4 days. Um, I would say that at least personally, I didn't feel like one lasted any longer, shorter than the other, in terms of the acute withdrawal. Um, yeah. So overall, the whole package, um, I'm gonna say that I still think heroin withdrawal is worse because of the mental aspect. Um, but I understand that perhaps people that went harder with fentanyl, um, or perhaps just aren't as susceptible to the way that my mind processed specifically what I felt during the heroin withdrawal. I could see how maybe it was worse for them.